From our hostel at Jaffa Gate, we wandered through the old city via the Damascus Gate, past Herod's Gate and also the Rockefeller Museum. As the museum didn't open until 10 AM, we continued on to the Garden of Gethsemane, which is located at the foot of the Mount of Olives. You can't wander around the old city at night. There are no street lamps and no landmarks. The leisurely stroll toward the Garden of Gethsemane was just full of interesting sights. As we approached the Garden of Gethsemane, we could see a number of points of interest. First, we're looking at the Kidron Valley and the Mount of Olives. Now, although the Bible translation refers to a mount, we would actually call it a hill. And similarly, what's referred to as a valley is only a few hundred meters across, whereas in our terms, a valley can be more than 50 kilometers across. Next, on the Mount of Olives is the Russian Orthodox Church of St. Mary Magdalene with its golden onion-shaped domes, a Byzantine Russian-style design built by the Russian Tsar Alexander III in memory of his mother. Must have got on well with his mother then. Further down the slope is the ancient Jewish cemetery. Now there's a very good reason to be buried here. This is because when the Messiah arrives, all the dead will be resurrected, and since the Messiah will arrive through the Golden Gate, then people who are buried on the Mount of Olives will be the first in line to rise from the dead. Unlike the majority of Christendom who believe in a resurrection to heaven, the ancient Jews believed in a resurrection back here on earth. You can't go through Jerusalem's Golden Gate today because the Muslims have walled it off to prevent the Messiah from arriving through the gate and resurrecting the Jews. Next to the Garden of Gethsemane is the Church of All Nations, also known as the Church of Agony, and also known as the Basilica of Agony. This basilica was built to recall how Jesus agonized over us to the point of sweating blood, as recorded in Luke chapter 22 verse 44. This is the third one on the site, the previous ones being destroyed in 1614 AD and the other in 1200 AD by the Muslims. I couldn't help thinking that visiting sites like this, of which there are many, can both make a religious fanatic more fanatical and a religious skeptic more skeptical. Our final stop for the day was the Rockefeller Museum. It's an easy walk to get there by going through Lions Gate and the Old City. As mentioned, you can't go through the Golden Gate. Israel is a civilized country. You could always buy food anytime. We bought lots of these. Yummy. Of course, we called in at the usual tourist spots. This one's probably a fake. This one's definitely a fake. The Rockefeller Archaeological Museum is situated in a magnificent white limestone building. It houses an extraordinary collection of antiquities unearthed in excavations conducted in the country, mainly during the time of the British Mandate, 1919 to 1948. The museum was opened in 1938. We looked at the usual things such as these esophaguses, and I'd just like to reiterate that my interest in archaeology is as much as my interest in biology. Unfortunately, photos are not permitted inside the building, but photos are allowed in the inner courtyard. Mount Scopus is a hill that overlooks the old city of Jerusalem. For me personally, it is significant because I stood here 14 years ago and hope that one day Lillian would also join me on the spot. Today, parts of this area are a UN-protected Jewish property exclave within the Jordanian occupied territory. Now, if you don't know what this means, then please feel free to go there and find out. It also means from this lookout, which is what Scopus means, you can see the Judean desert in Jordan and also get a bird's eye view of the New Jerusalem and the Old City. Historically, Mount Scopus has been strategically important as a base from which to attack the city since antiquity. A Roman legion camped here in 66 CE and again in 70 CE and sieged the city. Here you can see Herod's Gate, the Rockefeller Museum, and the road to the Garden of Gethsemane where we walked the other day. In a picture like this, it's possible to point out many hundreds of historical sites and talk about them. So you can imagine then that in a short video like this, that in relative terms, we're going to describe almost nothing of our experiences in Jerusalem. From Mount Scopus, we headed back down to the Kidron Valley, this time past Absalom's tomb and Zechariah's tomb. From Zechariah's tomb, we get a good view of the Jewish cemetery located at the foot of the Mount of Olives. Here's a view looking back toward Mount Scopus. In the background you can see also the Hebrew University. Next we went over to Mount Zion to visit King David's tomb. Now just a reminder that Mount Zion is just a tiny hill. You can walk around it in no time. This area, located outside the city walls, and more about the reason for that later, is the traditional site of the tomb of King David, and one of the most holiest places for Jews, Christians and Muslims. It's one of the few sites in the world that is shared by the three religions. Here, as in many places of worship, men and women are ushered into separate areas as they're not allowed to worship or congregate together. No photos are allowed in the tomb area, unfortunately. After visiting the tomb, we went next door to the room of the Last Supper. Because it was Easter, it was packed with Christian pilgrims. There's a golden olive tree here too. From Mount Zion, we walk through Zion Gate and up to the Jewish quarter to visit the Roman Cardo. Uncovered by Naaman Avogad's team in the 1970s, this Cardo dates back to the time of Emperor Justinian in the first half of the 6th century AD. In ancient Roman city planning, a Cardo served as the centre of economic life. The street was lined with shops, merchants and vendors. From the word Cardo we get the words cardinal and cardiac, meaning heart. Later, when we were to visit Madaba in Jordan, we saw a 6th century church mosaic floor map of this Cardo that was in Jerusalem. photography is permitted inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is also called the Church of Resurrection. This church has been an important pilgrimage destination since at least the 4th century, as the site of the death and resurrection of Jesus. Today it also serves as the headquarters of the Greek Orthodox Church. However, the building is shared between several Christian churches and secular interests in an arrangement unchanged for centuries. The site is built over Golgotha, or Hill of Calvary, where the Bible says that Jesus was crucified, and is said to also contain the place where Jesus was buried, called the Sepulchre. Although this site is situated within the walls of the city today, recent archaeological digs have confirmed that this area was outside the city walls in Jesus' time. I might add that as time goes by, more and more of the past is understood due to archaeological work confirming the accuracy of the Bible and the location of many traditional Bible sites. Much can be said about this site, but I don't want to risk this video being a cure for insomnia. For many Christian pilgrims, the most important and meaningful thing they'll do here is walk the Via Dolorosa, the route that Jesus took after being condemned by Pilate, then crucified and buried. Although the exact route taken by Jesus is not known, the pilgrimage has great meaning due to its proximity to the original events and the reflection upon them along the way. Today, there are 14 stations of the cross which are clearly marked. A few other interesting sights can also be seen on the way as well. This wall is the remains of the great Jewish temple, which had stood for 500 years. Herod began rebuilding and adding on to the temple in around about 19 BCE. The total work was not finished until 50 years later. The temple itself was destroyed by the Romans only a few years after its completion, in about 70 CE. Again, there's massive amounts of history, custom, politics, and so forth associated with this monument, or what's left of it. Today, to visit the wall, you're thoroughly searched and there are strict dress codes for entry. Shorts are not allowed, but jandals are okay. There are separate entrances for men and women, of course. Last time I was here it was on the Sabbath day, so no photos were allowed, but I was allowed into the synagogue. Representatives of the rabbi mistook me for a rich Asian, so demanded a large sum of money for entry to the prayer area. Little did they realise that after 35 years, I had inherited some of Lillian's Scottish ancestry and was not about to pay to have my many sins forgiven.
On the woman's side, I was told not to show my back to the wall, but to walk away backwards. But 35 years of living with Stephen had taught me that I don't have to listen to anyone. So I turned my back anyway and walked away as normal.
Our lunch stop was a Jewish restaurant located on one of the hills of Jerusalem with magnificent views back to the city. After paying for the overinflated lunch bill, we vowed never to come back here again, where you even have to pay to go to the toilet. The sad thing was, when we got back to New Zealand, I reviewed my old film archives only to find that I said the same thing 14 years ago. Growing old can be a frustrating and expensive exercise. After lunch we went to the Jewish Holocaust Museum, which further reduced my sympathy for the Jews. But wait, there's more. These Jewish settlements are built in areas to deliberately displace Palestinian homes. Back at Caesar's Hotel, we enjoyed yet another delicious Israeli meal and were entertained by an arrogant Jewish head waiter as he went head to head in a loud and intense verbal battle with an Asian pilgrim leader from Hong Kong. The tour leader wanted his group to sit together, but the head waiter decided it was too much trouble to arrange it. The next morning, I went to buy a toothbrush because my 10-year-old airline freebie one had finally collapsed on me the previous night. Public transport is pretty easy to take. The locals on the bus obviously having a good laugh at me trying to take a photo of ourselves, a trick I learned from looking at Facebook. This morning's leisurely stroll would take us past Jaffa Gate, Mount Zion, the Valley of Hinnom, and then to the city of King David. The story of the city of David began over 3,000 years ago when he left the city of Hebron and established Jerusalem as the unified capital of the tribes of Israel. Today, the story of the city of David continues. Deep underground, the city is revealing some of the most exciting archaeological finds of the ancient world. The tour of the city of David begins with a breathtaking observation point overlooking biblical Jerusalem, which sends you 3,800 years back in time to the days of Abraham, when the first foundations of the city were laid. Here, while exploring the recently excavated fortresses and passageways, visitors relive King David's conquest of the Jebusite city as described in the second book of Samuel. Our walk ended at the Gihon Spring, the major water source of Jerusalem for over 1,000 years, and where, according to the Book of Kings, Solomon was anointed as king. You're allowed to bring a torch and wade through the spring in King Hezekiah's 2,700-year-old water tunnel, one of the wonders of early engineering. But if you suffer from claustrophobia, fear of the dark, water and so on, then you shouldn't go into this tunnel. Depending on the rain, water can be up to waist deep for the walk, but when we went through there, it was only knee deep. We didn't actually walk through the entire length of the tunnel, which is about 500 metres, as we weren't into extreme sports. Our last stop in the area was the Pool of Siloam, which is at the other end of Hezekiah's tunnel. It's an easy walk to the pool in shorts and jandals, and on the way there are many historical and archaeological points of interest. From this vantage point you can also get a good view of Zechariah's tomb. Remember that Jerusalem in its parts was built and destroyed and rebuilt and redestroyed on a number of occasions. In the 13th century, Sultan Suleiman, the greatest of the Ottoman Turkish sultans, had his architects rebuild Jerusalem's walls. Either through ignorance or because the architects hoped to keep some of the building funds for themselves, the new walls didn't include Mount Zion or the City of David, and that's why these places are outside the old city walls today. Also, the other mistake they made was to include the Church of the Holy Sepulchre within the walls. It should have been outside, as the Bible had reported. When the Sultan learned of the architect's omissions, he had them beheaded. Ouch. The pool is mentioned several times in the Bible. In Isaiah chapter 8 verse 6 it mentions the pool's waters, and in chapter 22 verse 9 it references the construction of the tunnel. For Christians, the pool is the location where Jesus sent a man who had been blind from birth. He regained his sight by washing his eyes in the pool. Today the pool is just a tiny area, but these pictures are an artist's impression of what the pool area may have looked like.
3 months ago, I heard you can come to Hezekiah's tunnel and put your feet in the pool of Siloam, where Jesus told the man to wash his eyes and be healed. So that's what I've done. Got my feet in here. I'm happy now.
And I'm happy too. Took us absolutely ages to find this place. We ended our walk around the city by calling by the refreshment area, where we met some security guards. By law, all school children on school trips must be accompanied by armed escort. They said to us, "Don't you feel unsafe in New Zealand because you don't go around carrying guns?" This reminded me of the time I worked in Tel Aviv for IBM. All Israeli employees arrived at work with a pistol strapped to their waist. What a safe country. After visiting the City of David, we walked up to the Dome of the Rock via the Western Wall. As you can see, they're right next door to each other. Security is pretty tight here. Fortunately, paragraph 4, the metal detector has been made suitable for use on the Shabbat or Sabbath, and it's just as well that the chief rabbis of Israel have ruled that walking through the metal detector system doesn't violate the Sabbath. Lucky for them. In addition, dress standards are pretty high, and here a synagogue officer is examining Lillian to see if she's dressed properly. What a great job. This is the site of the first and second temple. Right now the Muslims are here and this is their monument. There's a stack of rules to comply with before entering the shrine, one of which is that you have to be a believer. My looks and dress standard gave away the fact that I wasn't a Muslim. Anyway, photos are not permitted inside. The Dome of the Rock was completed in 691 and is called that because it's believed to be the rock from which the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. The Jews also believe this is the place where Abraham sacrificed Isaac, although the Muslims reckon this happened in Mecca. The gold look is because the dome was actually originally made of gold, but these days it's actually aluminium covered in gold leaf, which was donated by the late King Hussein of Jordan. This place is also referred to as the Temple Mount, or Mount Moriah, and where we were standing would have been in the vicinity of the Holy and the Most Holy in King Solomon's temple. Jews are not allowed to pray here, and as a result, this area is always a flashpoint, something to keep in mind if you're thinking about coming here. After having a good look around, we headed down to the Archaeological Park and Museum, our final destination for the day. On the way to the archaeological park, we came across some excavations of the city walls at the time of the First Temple period. Now that's over 3,000 years ago. Most tourists don't come here due to being part of a tour group, but for us it was part of the payoff of exploring the old city for a week. The Jerusalem Archaeological Park was one of the final highlights of our stay in Jerusalem. It starts off at the Davidson Centre, which is actually built into the basement of an 8th century building, scrupulously preserving it. Here, there are heaps of multimedia presentations, making you feel like you're actually in the Second Temple. Amazing! Once you're outside, the park covers 5,000 years of history in a fun and interesting way, and you can also touch the artefacts as well as stand on the actual floors of 1,400 years ago. This is because the park starts off in the location of the original Second Temple city walls. You're allowed to climb right up onto the high parts of the walls, where you can get a bird's eye view of the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives and the general park area, and also the constant stream of tour buses. What a breathtaking sight for the adventurous. Although these Byzantine homes date back only 1,400 years to the 6th century, these would have been built over the homes once occupied by the scribes and Pharisees of the Second Temple period. What an amazing experience it was to wander around here. Here, at the feet of the southern wall of the Temple Mount, in the area known as the Ophel, you can climb up the original steps of the Holder Gates that lead to the Temple Mount.
This floor is 2,000 years old from the Second Temple period time, and I'm able to stand on it.
And I'm able to stand right here in my shorts and jandals, supported by this 2,000-year-old column from the time of Herod the Great. Behind me is the Mount of Olives, and in front of me is the Temple Mount. What a fantastic experience of history this has been for us, and as a bonus, we hope you've enjoyed sharing this part of our holiday as much as we have.